Right, welcome to the Executive Member for Transport decision session, Tuesday, 17th of January 2023, and apologies for the slightly late start. Just in case anyone is watching live to see the consideration of item 5, which is speed limit traffic regulation order amendments. We've had some late information which wasn't able to be included in the report, response from the police, yes, as of yesterday. And so in consultation with the officers, we've agreed to defer that item to the next meeting, so those comments can be incorporated into the report and their recommendations taken in the light of police comments, rather than having to go through each one now, considering their late response. So I'm proposing to defer item 5, and if any of the public speakers, we did have one public speaker on that item, who we've now informed of the situation. So if I move on to the published agenda, first item is declarations of interest. I have no declarations of interest on the agenda items before me today. Second one is the minutes of the meeting of decision session 13th of December 2022. I'm happy to sign those as a correct record of the meeting. Item 3 is public participation. As I said, one of the public speakers won't be speaking this time, will come at my next meeting in February. I have also on the list, Mr. Hughie Ferguson. Is that in person? Okay. So I'll move on to Councillor Myers wants to speak on petitions. And obviously, if you can bear in mind, if you were going to speak about the speed limit one, we've deferred that.
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, I want to speak about petitions, but I know you were here late yesterday evening. You might want to check working time directives, so you're in very early again. So anyway, start on a joke. Petitions. I wanted to talk about a couple that are in there, acknowledging the Highcliffe Court residents parking petition. And I wanted to make a point around asking for the waiting lists to just be worked through as fast as possible. You will note that there is already on the list the Compton Street, Roslyn Street residents parking petition. It's in the waiting list and it is over the road from Highcliffe Court. And I've spoken before to officers and councillors about this situation, which sees all of the streets one by one in an area go through a process whereby they have to deal with a very acute problem, because other streets next door, Abbey Street was the first one that went in this area to residents parking, and then followed by Clifton Dale. All the problems then just concentrate into the next street, and they're much more acute than what they were. And so residents deal with this 2 years or so of waiting to get round to a restriction being in place. So wider areas being looked at in the first instance would really make such a difference on residents' lives. Because as I say, the problem just gets really acute and concentrated than what existed in the first place. And secondly, on the petition that myself and Councillor Wells submitted on traffic for Westminster traffic options for a low traffic neighbourhood around Westminster or Greencliff Drive and the Avenue. I've got a couple of additional petitions that I would just like to drop with you from residents that have written to us after we've submitted that. And I just wanted to say it would be really useful if I could arrange a meeting, mainly with officers, but I'd happy to include yourself, councillor, to discuss feasibility and options around that particular petition. So I'll formally just drop an email in, but I did want to just attend this morning to make you aware that's what I'm doing. And very, very lastly, one of the public speakers that had to leave has sent me their speech. It was Mr. Ferguson. I think it's around parking issue that's on the agenda, and I agreed to send that speech to you. So I'll do that later today. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that, and we'll consider that when we come to that item. So the other speaker I have on my list still is Councillor Orrell who wants to speak on the stadium parking item, which is item 7 on the agenda.
Morning, everyone. I did ask to speak on petitions as well, so and speed limits, but that one's obviously been deferred.
Back for that one.
Right. The petition about the old village in Huntington asked the executive member to look at measures to improve safety for residents of the old village, Huntington.
Mm-hmm.
There are particular concerns, and have been for some time, about safety at the sharp bend at the north end of the old village. Following our request for action for this area last year, we were told that as the average speed was low and there'd been no injury accidents, no action would be taken. The speed profile is actually self-fulfilling. The majority of users of the old village are local people who know how to approach the bend carefully. It's the fewer, less frequent motorists using the old village to avoid Northmoor Road who drives at speed. This results in continual anxiety for nearby residents. They think, will it be safe to get in my car? Will it be safe to take my children out? It's no exaggeration that the people in that area of the old village fear for their safety. Therefore, it's only a minority of users that speed, and therefore overall speeds inevitably are low. Following the incident last month, when a vehicle hit the wall, resulting in that wall's demolition by the vehicle and the windows of nearby houses being broken, residents need some physical measures that give them reassurance that vehicles will not drive into their houses, which they're terrified of currently. The measures need to be short-term and medium-term. Residents are looking for physical or signage measures that can be implemented quickly, together with a medium-term investigation into additional measures. I've spoken to officers about this. We've discussed potential measures there. I hope those are now in train to be implemented as soon as possible. As the petition's been with the council for several months, residents expect that the consultation on potential measures will be undertaken as soon as possible. The other item, Chair, is to do with the stadium and the parking issues there. Some background, I think, first, Chair. In the lead up to the stadium opening, we had a number of meetings with officers, stadium management, bus companies, where plans were drawn up to encourage maximum use of buses by supporters. Sorry?
Right. Can you try and keep this brief? We've about a minute left.
I would have thought I had 3 minutes for each item, Chair.
Sure, not usually, but
Okay.
if you can try and keep it short.
Okay, will do. It was also agreed to have parking restrictions for New Lane and the experimental plan for Sadler's Close and Forge Close. As ward councillors, we were concerned about potential parking on side streets, but were assured that if there were issues, measures could be taken quickly to deal with them. Then the pandemic struck and changed all these projections about bus usage when government strongly discouraged the use of buses. When the stadium opened to spectators, initially attendances were low. The main issues were in the Priory Wood area. Following complaints from residents, we asked for measures to be consulted on in this area. Later, when City got to the playoffs and attendances increased, more issues with parking were reported in other areas. There's now a specific problem with a link road from Anthea Drive to Wemby Grove, where parking close to junctions has been reported. This needs careful monitoring. Finally, Chair, we would hope that the general parking situation for match days be continued to be monitored to ensure the amenity and safety of local residents is maintained. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that. We'll consider that when we come to that item. So that concludes the public speakers, and we can now actually move on to the item 4, which is acknowledgement of petitions, page 9 to 34.
Morning, I'll
Morning. So do you want to introduce this item, and then we can look at each one? Specific points. But
this report presented to you is the acknowledgement of a number of petitions. There's actually 8 in the report that we've received in the last sort of 6 months or so. So it's a further report acknowledging petitions, and there is a mix of petitions in here around resident parking, low traffic neighbourhoods, which are referred to in a lot of petitions as rat runs, highway maintenance and highway maintenance issues. So shall we start from the top?
Okay.
Sorry, just first on the list was this is this was an issue that was created because there was an overgrown hedge.
This is Field Lane,
Lane,
isn't it?
yeah.
Badger Hill area.
That's it, yeah.
Yeah.
And in terms of and then there was a representation about the width of the footway. So work has been done already with the landowners on the maintenance of the hedge. So that's been done, and we're working with the landowner now and the tenant to put in place a regular process for that hedge maintenance. But we will also still investigate works that we can do on the footway, which I think we probably could do with some work. So
yeah, I mean, just to say, I'm familiar with this location and also the issue. I do think, as we've doing with this location, where ward councillors have regular repeat complaints year on year, it makes sense for us to try and have a more sort of procedural process to work through with the landowner and identify, an appropriate cutting regime to keep the footpaths and cycleways accessible, but also respecting biodiversity and issues about nesting season and so forth. So I welcome the work that has already been done on this one in terms of the hedge being cut. But I also note that, the location, there is on one side of the road, there's a dedicated cycle route, and this is a side which has been identified for foot traffic. So it is important that it's accessible for wheelchairs, buggies, whatever, not just about scraping past the hedge. And if we can come up with a longer term approach, not just for this location, but in general on the issue of maintaining access. The issue is obviously where it's not council responsibility, the private landowner has responsibility, but we have the responsibility to make sure that they fulfil their duties, as I understand it.
That's true.
Okay, so I'm happy with that one. We are really at this stage just giving an update on progress with these, aren't we?
Yeah. There's item number 2 was it's one that I forgot, which was actually a petition relating to the council maintaining funding for the number 11 bus. This was dealt with at the November 22 executive meeting, so there's no further action required from yourself.
And I suppose to say that this really fits in with a wider approach in terms of our BSIP and our funding for bus services in the city, which will be very much under review in the next few months. I don't know if
obviously exec made a
mention
decision.
that.
Obviously exec made a decision to maintain the geography of the network as far as funding allows. So bus services shouldn't disappear, although frequency may be affected depending on the budgets available.
Okay, thank you. So we note that one. So the third one is a crossing, Fairfield Cross and Fairfield Drive in Skelton.
Yeah, so this is across the A19,
Right.
where there is a newish development on one side of the road, and it wasn't conditioned in the planning that there would be a pedestrian crossing for various reasons. What we've committed to do on this one is conduct a review, see if the conditions that were predicted through planning are played out, and then we'll work it through our pedestrian crossing review. If there is a.
Is this a housing development of a couple of hundred houses on the other side of A9?
I don't think, there's I think there's I can't remember the number off the top of my head, but yeah.
Right, it's just
It's not insignificant.
I seem to recall the debate at the planning committee that I was party to, saying there should be a crossing. But we are where we are, so I believe so that will be progressed through
So we'll do a further review on that if you know.
Okay, so that will be a separate report. Let's note that. Yeah. So the next one was Moor Lane and Princess Road in Strensall, a resurfacing request.
Yeah. And so details in the report where the priority would be, it is possible we can work this into I think it's the 24-25 highway maintenance programme. Off the back of the petition, that we'll do further inspection on those pieces of road, and then we'll just work it through our normal highway maintenance process.
Yeah. Okay. So I think the main point here is that we have an inspection process and a prioritisation that takes into account safety factors, location close to vulnerable road users, hospitals and schools and that type of thing are all factored in. But the benefit of petition, as you said, is making sure that we're fully aware of exactly what the circumstances are, and if there is any immediate reactive maintenance needed, then we can address that separately.
Yeah.
Okay. So the next one we've got is the
this is the item.
This is the Westminster Road low traffic neighbourhood.
So this was the one Councillor Myers made a representation on. This is one of the few what have been termed either low traffic neighbourhoods or rat rooms on the list. What we'd resolved is we would bring a report to your next decision session where we'd look to we would present to you the order and when we would do those in terms of the list. So that will be put into the list, and within that will include consultation with residents. We'll go through that process.
Okay, so I'll welcome that. So at this point in time, as you say, this is recording what we've had. So we've got a snapshot today of the different petitions, but then we'll have a further report, future meeting, hopefully next decision session, to identify the most cost-effective approach to tackling those issues, bearing in mind the pressures that staff are under, and the as Councillor Myers referred to, the sort of issues around the city that we're looking for reports and surveys and so forth, that we try and work through those most effectively. So the next one we've got is St Benedict's Road,
Yeah.
and I think I should say I am aware of this one because it certainly was an issue when there was during COVID there was the trial of a one-way system for the shops, and a lot of traffic was diverted down this particular area, through this residential area, despite it being a 20-mile-an-hour with quite significant speed humps on it. And then the same again, I think that the reason that this petition was raised was because the same thing happened again was when there was a sinkhole in the middle of Bishopsthorpe Road that meant that it had to be closed for a couple of weeks. Yeah, so that's how that one's arisen. But I think residents, want to see some sort of broad approach, because if maintenance work is quite regularly happens, and if this sort of becomes the pattern, then that would be some concern.
Unfortunately, we couldn't predict the sinkhole. But, usually we're in a better position in terms of organising our diversions for roadworks.
Yeah. Okay, so that's noted then.
And yeah, just to note that that will be part of the report in February.
Okay, and then the last one I've got is again, Councillor Myers referred to Highcliffe Court and the whole issue around residents parking permits. I would say, as a prelude to this, this has rather become my specialist subject for Christmas quizzes, mainly in terms of trying to resolve the difficult conundrum we have across the city. I do acknowledge the concerns that Councillor Myers and other councillors of the last 6 months have referred to about the progression and what's the most effective way for us to deal with that. The challenge is that certainly since I became executive member, we have had a more holistic approach. I do recall that I think the first one where we applied that was South Bank area of the city. The problem is that human nature being what it is, the people who are at the front line experiencing the parking problems very much appreciate that they want to have something done about it. And Res Park is the most obvious solution other than corner protection, just from a safety perspective. But inevitably there is a knock-on effect. But the people who live further away don't really see the problem, would prefer to stay as they are without any annual charge for a permit. But then as soon as it hits them, then they want it, so they then join the queue. So although we did take for the whole of South Bank in an area, we've then actually applied it to only part of South Bank as to the area where the response was sufficient to justify the change to regulations. So maybe I've stolen your thunder a bit, but
No, that's fine.
that's just personal experience of dealing with these.
All I was going to add on this one is the other schemes that were mentioned. I'm assuming they're on the list. Compton Street.
Yeah, Compton Street, Wasson Street, they're on the list. I believe some of them have been considered previously and they've never been residential support. When Abbey Street, it was taken forward, there was that only left Highcliffe Court, and there was consideration of other streets, but sometimes it's the residents don't want at that time, they don't want to pay, and then obviously, as the council alluded to, there is the knock-on effect, and it does change mind. Obviously, we saw this on Kexby Avenue with the university scheme very recently.
And this is another item, obviously, that we'll bring back in terms of the order, and we'll bring the order back.
Yes.
To next meeting.
Yeah, I mean, I've dealt with, familiar with a number of schemes and requests in my own ward, which have progressed at equally slow pace as anywhere else across the city. But there are legal processes that we have to go through, and there's a finite staff resource to process them. So welcome any suggestions from people about any more effective ways of doing it, but certainly, it has been a concern in mind for at least 5 or 6 years now, trying to find the best way of addressing the issue. So I think
We've just got the item that Councillor Orrell spoken, which is the petition around Old Village.
right.
Huntington. So the petition itself was relating to a closure, investigation of a closure.
Right.
of Old Village, which is just, I think, either north or just south of Church Street. I think it was on the design that was sent through by residents. So we'll consider that separately, and that's part of the medium-term measures that we'll look into. In the short term, I just again like to say, for the benefit of council, our officers completely acknowledge the anxiety and fears that the residents have. We've sent several sort of officers round to investigate and see what short-term measures we could do. We're doing there's an engineer and safety officer going on site this week. I'm not sure when this week, and off the back of that, I'll produce some information for the ward councillors, and then we can just see where we can progress after that, if that's okay.
Thank you, Chair. If you could contact the residents.
Sure, yeah.
Who've contacted you.
Yeah, sure.
Anybody watching may not hear what you're saying, so just repeat.
So it was just a request
contact
from
them
Councillor
directly,
to contact the residents.
Yeah.
No problem.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you for that item. So I think that concludes that report. As we said at the beginning, this is very much the stage of acknowledging progress since these were submitted, but we'll have a fuller report in due course on each of those items. So that then, as I said, item 5, which is the speed limit regulation order amendments, we're deferring that to the next meeting to incorporate the police response and officer consideration of that. So that'll give us time to cover that. So that takes us on to the Capital Programme Monitor 2 on page 87.
Yeah, so sorry, Chair. This is, I'm just trying to bring the paper up. This is the our regular Transport Capital Quarterly Monitor. Quite a lot of detail in this report, so not intending to go through item by item unless there are any exceptions that you want to raise.
Just put the microphone on. Welcome this report. I do note that there's a number of projects in here which are being progressed. There's 1, 2 that I particularly wanted to just comment on. Maybe just some little data. Paragraph 24 on page 92 refers to the bazaar scheme, and I think that might have been, I think that might well have been discussed at a previous decision session. Just there may be some, I don't know how far we've got with, have these been booked in yet, do you know, for when they're actually going to be constructed? There's Bishopgate Street, which is on the approach to, it's near to Skeldergate Bridge, if I remember rightly.
Yeah. So are we talking about
the Bishopgate Street?
Bishopgate Street, March 23.
Okay. It's just, I think I did note last time I came past there, we do need to just check that it is fully accessible. There's a sort of quite a steep pre-existing ramp that connects the crossing over the adjacent road that does need addressing. It needs to have tactiles, but it also probably needs the slope checking and make sure that that's correct. Because I wouldn't want us to do everything else and then still leave it so that
Okay.
people with the wheelchairs or
I'll-
whatever
I'll,
can't get to the crossing.
Yeah, my understanding is that the design's been approved.
Okay.
Well, I'll double
If
check.
you could just check on
with
that,
the
yeah,
team,
we appreciate that, thanks. And then a note on paragraph 25 refers to bus lane enforcement scheme. Is that something we've got any details on? Is it still only? Is that part of the BSIP?
It's the bus lane enforcement that we currently do
Oh, I see, okay.
in the two locations that we do it.
Right. And there was a couple of things to do with, which is quite topical, I thought, to do with flooding at the moment.
Yeah.
I'm noting there's probably very welcome in the area work on paragraph 30 about to replace an existing bridge over River Foss at Skelton, which I believe is because it's on the public rights of way, so I assume that's a footbridge, which I'm sure will be welcome. On paragraph 31 refers to the work to raise the level of the approach to Millennium Bridge from Butcher Terrace, which seems like every winter now goes underwater. It was featured in the picture on the press over the weekend, cyclist not following advice and getting wet feet at that point. So very much welcome progress on that scheme. And then paragraph 33, there's a reference to new flood signs, which I think has been delayed to next year, but it certainly would be progress if we can get automatic signs rather than the current arrangement of fold down signs, which inevitably don't get folded back up very quickly, which sort of sends the wrong message to people about roads being closed when they're no longer closed due to flooding. So I think that would be certainly an advance. And I think just again on that one, we probably need to make sure that the location for those is updated, because Clementhorpe has now got a flood barrier in place that wasn't previously there. And when I came past last night, I didn't see any sort of sign at the top of the road that alerts people to whether or not there's access to Terry Avenue with that flood barrier in operation. So that might need to be updated. And then there's a whole list. Paragraph 35 just summarises the active travel schemes, which we have at various stages. So that again is welcome that those, as many of those as possible, are going to be progressed in the coming year. So I think that covers the points I wanted to raise there. So I'm happy to approve that with those notes. Good. So then paragraph, agenda item 7 is the one that Councillor Orwell was concerned about, stadium parking impact, and the consultation on this is this Darryl? Sorry.
Morning, Councillor. Yes, so the state, as the councillor commented on, the initial review was undertaken by residents in the Huntington area to ask about where they thought the issues were. It was decided to prioritise the Priory Wood area. A proposal went out for junction protection to try and reduce obstructive parking. We did get a few people in objection, but some of the representations misinterpreted and didn't assume we were going to put restrictions in a larger area. Once it was explained fully, they removed. The officer recommendation on this is to progress with the implementation to increase safety at those Priory junctions. There was other concerns as well from residents about how they'll be able to access for if they had visitors and things like that. But I think this came under the misunderstanding of the extent we're looking at, because the tradesmen, visitors shouldn't be parking on the junctions anyway. So it's just giving us as an authority the opportunity to enforce for our CEOs for obstructing parking.
Yes. But yes, so I mean, on that, obviously, if people are parking in contravention of a highway code, then the police can come out and
Yeah.
deal with it, but they obviously haven't got resource to do that, where it's far more efficient. Because
Yeah.
the other
on a
lines
match
that
day,
most people know what that means, and
Yeah.
and then if there's regular situation of people ignoring that, then we can enforce that ourselves.
Yeah, and then on a match day, the police might have other priorities around the stadium, which might
Yes.
deter from that enforcement.
Um,
And obviously, council all requested further monitoring, which is something we are doing, and the report goes into the other areas that were raised as part of the consultation.
mhm.
The link road between Avenue Grove and Wemby is one we're looking to propose. We're asking for your permission now to take forward the conversation with
So we're at, yeah, so just,
delegation to James for the actual sign off at the extent.
okay, so we're at the stage of moving to advertise the proposed restrictions, which then goes into legal process.
Yeah.
Any formal objections?
But yeah, I think there was Avenue Grove, the link road, and then there was sorry, just bear with me 1 second, I just remember the exact location.
There's the junctions of
two-
Priory Wood Way.
Well, that's the one where we've advertised already.
Oh, okay.
And was the main request. But we did, as part of that, we did receive representations from other areas of the Huntington area. So there was the link road of Avenue.
Yeah.
And then there was one off Moulton Road near, and there was one more area which we're looking to, and I could just but yeah, there's 3 locations we're looking to take forward. We've looking to draw up plans for what restrictions will be required at those locations. So we're requesting that delegation is passed to James for approval of that, in the same way that to speed up the process.
Okay, yeah, well, I am happy with that, and as I know obviously there's quite significant level of representations have been submitted in the report, and taking those into account and your sort of recommended way forward, I'm happy to approve the recommendations as set out on paragraph 3, and paragraph 3 brackets 1, 2 and 3, is that right?
Well, there was another item that I was going to speak about separately, which was the experimental residence parking scheme, because that's to remove it. It's slightly it's
So that was put in place initially.
Yeah,
to
as
be
the
able to
council
gauge
mentioned,
what-
it was one of the initials, see if it would help. There was a mixed response. A lot of the residents don't want to pay and didn't want the scheme to go forward. Some residents did say that the signs do help but don't want the scheme. So if we remove the scheme, we will remove the signs.
Yeah, well, I mean, I suppose that's the penalty we pay for trying to react to individual
Yeah.
circumstances.
There was
will be
other representations about there's a church on the other side of the road, and people do park on the street for the church. And
Yeah,
because of restrictions, they're only meant to be phone match days. So
okay,
it,
yes,
there didn't seem to be the concern from residents. There was 2 objections. One that didn't want to pay for the permits if it was to become, and the other one that was happy to and felt that it offered a benefit to the street, but every other representation was against.
so the broad, I wouldn't say consensus, but the majority felt that they didn't really need the scheme. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, particularly as you say, it's a
Yeah,
match
there were 12
days.
against,
Right,
14 we received.
12 against,
12 people against the continuation of the residents parking.
right, okay. So on that basis, you're recommending removing the
Yeah, so
the
the
current arrangement?
the experimental scheme will just come to an end and we'll remove the signs.
Right. So when does that run out?
The end of this month.
At the end of this month,
Mm.
okay. And as the councillor said, we will continue to monitor.
Yeah, continue
the
to monitor the
impact
area, yeah.
of that.
Yes.
So, you know, I mean, it is very much one of those things that there are different reasons for residents parking depending on where you are. I mean, where I actually live now, it's become one because it's close to a school, and other people, it's a stadium, city centre, it's people going to parking up and going to work. You know, there's different reasons, but
Yeah.
it's a tool that we have that can be used to try and help residents manage the street, and so that they have provision for themselves and visitors to be able to park there. So, I mean, on the basis of your report and your recommendations, I'm happy to approve this item.
Okay.
Yeah. So that takes me on to any urgent business. I don't have any urgent business. So conclude the meeting at that point. Thank you, everyone.